prepared this video to talk about the 4 key provisions of the Cal OSHA Emergency COVID-19 Standards. This went into effect November 30th, 2020, and will remain in effect through May 29th, 2021, unless it gets otherwise extended. These provisions apply to all employees or employers other than environments where there's just one employee that's able to isolate. They also don't apply to individuals working from home. So with these standards came some key definitions that I think it's important to define before we talk about the provisions. So the definitions that have been created, the first one is called a COVID case. And it's exactly what we think it is. A COVID case is somebody who tests positive for COVID-19. The COVID case is also somebody that's been given orders to isolate. Why would somebody be given orders to isolate? Well, it could be from their medical provider because they're experiencing symptoms and maybe they're waiting for a test. But the COVID case is somebody who has tested positive or has orders to isolate. The next definition that has been defined is the COVID-19 exposure. So there's the case, which is the positive case, then there's the exposure. So those are the individuals that have been exposed to a COVID case. And when we say exposed, we mean they have been within 6 feet of distance, with or without a mask or face covering. So it doesn't matter, mask or no mask, doesn't matter. They've come within 6 feet of distance for 15 or more cumulative minutes within a 24-hour period. So that is a COVID-19 exposure. We call them also 6, 15, 24s. So 6 feet of distance for 15 or more cumulative minutes over a 24-hour period. And total of 15 minutes cumulative means off and on. It doesn't have to be a full 15 minutes all at once. It's any 15-minute period within 24 hours. So let's say I've been within 6 feet of somebody for 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there, 10 minutes here, then they've been tested positive, then I've been exposed, right? So that's a COVID-19 exposure. The next definition is the high-risk exposure period. So what that looks like for COVID positive cases, the high-risk exposure period, we want to break down COVID cases between people who are symptomatic, meaning they have symptoms, and people who are asymptomatic. So that's a little bit different as far as the exposure period. So the exposure period for symptomatic COVID individuals is 2 days before they experience symptoms, up to 10 days after they have been tested, they tested positive. So so you want to look at 2 days before and up to 10 days after. The exposure period could continue, however, for those individuals if their symptoms go on beyond the 10 days. So you want to make sure they've been symptom-free for 24 hours. So that high-risk exposure period is while they're experiencing symptoms up to 24 hours after the symptoms have cleared. So for individuals that test positive for COVID, but they are asymptomatic, meaning they don't have any symptoms, the high-risk exposure period for those individuals is 2 days before they went in to get their before they took their sample for the testing, and up to 10 days after their test, they took the test. And then that is the high-risk exposure. Okay, so the next definition we want to talk about is an outbreak. And an outbreak is when you have 3 or more COVID positive cases in a workplace within a 14-day period. The reason that we want to define that is because there are some additional notification and testing requirements that we need to be aware of. So when you have an outbreak and then when you have a major outbreak. So major outbreak is another key term that we want to define. And a major outbreak is when we have individuals, 20 or more individuals within a 30-day period in the work environment. So 20 or more individuals testing positive within 30 days. And that's even more notification and stringent requirements. So for those 2 cases, the outbreak and the major outbreak, different notification requirements. And the last definition I want to break down for you is an exposed workplace. So an exposed workplace is any area in your work environment where the COVID-19 positive case was. You know, wherever, meaning not only at their workstation, but also in the hallways, in the break rooms, in the restrooms, any place in the work environment where that person has been is called an exposed workplace. Okay, so we're ready to get into the key provisions. Key provision number 1 says that as employers, we are required to have a written COVID-19 prevention plan, okay? This plan must include our method of communication, how we exclude workers, and what our process looks like, all of the logistics about that, how long they stay out. It also includes things like mandatory face coverings, distancing requirements, cleaning processes and procedures, all of our safety measures. And the good news about having to do this plan that OSHA has thought about in advance is they've put together a plan for us. So there is a sample plan on the Cal OSHA website. So if you want to just look up on their website, COVID-19 prevention plan for employers, there is a sample. And what you can do is go to that sample, and everything that's written in red is what they want you to customize for your work environment. So it's real simple. It's a boilerplate, plop in your logo, you know, and then just every area in red, put the specifics pertaining to your work environment. For example, one of the sections talks about, you know, cleaning requirements and what is the process? Who's responsible for the plan and communication? And so you put the name of the person responsible. You put, we're cleaning every 2 hours, and this is what we do. This is where employees can get sanitizer and wipes and, you know, all of the things that pertain to your specific environment. So they make it very easy. We're required to communicate this and to train employees on this plan. So that's the first thing, is to have a written plan. The second key provision, which is required by employers, are the notice requirements and the testing. So let's talk about notice first. The notice requirements are for COVID-19 exposures. So anybody that has come within 6 feet of distance, 15 or more cumulative minutes within a 24-hour period are COVID exposures. They must be notified within 24 hours of the exposure. So we have to notify them in writing. And when we notify them in writing, it's important to keep the name of the individual who they had been exposed by confidential. So we don't want to reveal the name. So we just have, you know, very generic information given, but nevertheless, it has to be in writing, and it has to be within 24 hours. The important thing to note here is if this happens on a Friday or a Saturday and you have weekends off, it's a good idea to have a general notice prepared so it's ready to implement very easily, because you have to work quickly and it may be on your day off. So it's also a good idea to gather all of the email addresses of all the employees so you can quickly send out an email, and the email is sufficient as written communication. So you have that all ready, you have that all available at your fingertips, and you've notified them within 24 hours. The other part about notification that employers are required to do is report positive COVID cases to your workers' comp carrier within 3 business days. So your workers' comp carrier, if they haven't already provided you with a spreadsheet that they would like you to complete, reach out to them, get the spreadsheet, and then you must submit that within 3 business days. The other part of key provision number 2 is the testing requirements. So for all COVID-19 exposures, the company's required to pay for their testing and to pay for the time that they spend testing. So we're responsible for paying and taking care of all of that. So the notice and the testing requirements for, remember when I was mentioning outbreaks or major outbreaks, there's extra notice requirements, keeping those in mind. That we must provide then extra notice to all on property, and then extra testing, and the testing may be at regular intervals. So it's just you take it on a case-by-case basis. The next key provision, number 3, are the exclusion rules. And so exclusion rules for a COVID case that's symptomatic are the individual must be excluded from the workplace for up to 10 days minimum of 10 days from the date that they first came down with symptoms. So it must be out of the workplace for 10 days. And then they also must be out of the workplace when, until the symptoms have resolved, 24 hours after the symptoms have resolved. So if 10 days goes by and the individual is still experiencing symptoms, they're still not able to come back to the workplace. They have to be excluded until 10 days, minimum 10 days, or the symptoms, have been resolved for 24 hours, or I should say, and the symptoms have been resolved for 24 hours and they're feeling better. So the minimum is 10 days, could be longer, just depending on their symptoms, and then you would work with their healthcare provider to determine when it's safe for them to come back to the workplace. For asymptomatic COVID positive cases, their exclusion period is up to 10 days after they've gone for their testing. So they don't have any symptoms, so you don't have to worry about symptoms resolving. Unless they develop symptoms along the way, then you'd have to make sure it's within 24 hours after they've resolved, after they've met that 10-day window. So those are the exclusion requirements for COVID cases. The exclusion requirements for COVID-19 exposures are a little bit different. Somebody's been exposed, they're to be out of the workplace for 14 days from the last date of exposure. So whatever the last date is, you're gonna wanna keep them out for 14 days. And also, remember, you're gonna wanna get them tested and pay for the testing and pay for the time that they spent testing. You don't have to require a negative test for the COVID positives to come back. As long as they've met that window of exclusion, you don't have to have anything, they don't have to produce a negative test to come back into the workplace. So the next key provision, and the last one, is the exclusion pay. We are required to provide, to keep the same benefits, the same employment status, everything the same for the employee, and continue their pay. This can be done through a variety of sources. It just depends. One of them is the FFCRA, Emergency Sick Pay. That has been extended through March 30th of 2021, so you get dollar for dollar tax credit for offering that to employees. So that's a good first step, making sure that they use that first. They can also use their sick pay. You can require them employees to use their sick pay. If not, there's other, get creative with it. Depending on your policies and procedures, perhaps they can work from home for some of the time if they don't have symptoms, and they're just, isolating, quarantining. But you are required to keep their pay and their stature and benefits intact. So that's the exclusion pay. Lastly, what I want to do in this video is break down the 7 steps to take when you get that phone call, that dreaded phone call that says, somebody, I've tested positive for COVID-19. Right? So what do you do at that moment? The first step is you let them know, give them their notice of their rights, their exclusion period, and their pay. So make sure they know. We want, and thank them. Say thank you so much for letting us know, because it takes everybody working together, and people have to be, upfront sometimes and honest and forthcoming to say, hey, I've got symptoms or I've tested positive, and we want to just acknowledge that we appreciate that, and that's what it takes to keep this out of the workplace. So thank them, let them know their rights, their pay, how long they have to be out. And step number 2 is to start your investigation. You're going to want to gather information from them. When were you last in the workplace, date and time? What was the first date that your symptom, took place? Or if you don't have symptoms, what was the date that you went in for your test? So all of those variables you want to determine. Step number 3 is you want to determine any close contacts that they have. So any COVID-19 exposures you need to be aware of, right? So that you can do your notification requirement and exclude those people from the workplace. So you want to find out who they have maybe been in contact with within 6 feet of distance, with or without a mask, for 15 or more minutes cumulative within a 24-hour period during their high-risk exposure time. So you want to get all that information so you can do the notifications. And so step number 4 is, once you've been given those close contact informations, who's been exposed, or potentially exposed, you want to give those individuals their notice within 24 hours. So in that written notification that you have, and hopefully you already have that planned and prepared, so it's real easy to just change the names and the dates, and you've got that going. So that is the notice requirements, and then also don't forget to notify your workers' comp carrier within 3 business days of the COVID positive case. Step number 5 is to implement testing. So you do, for those COVID exposures, those COVID-19 exposures, you do have to offer testing to them, to pay for the test and their time that they spent taking it. Step number 6 is to investigate. So don't forget that after this all takes place, look at, is this something that, was there an unsafe condition that happened in the workplace? Or did we not do our due diligence in terms of cleaning, sanitizing? Did we have a meeting with too many people in a room? What conditions may or may not have contributed to this that we might want to change, and what suggestions do we have, and make sure that we implement those. And last is determining the appropriate pay for the COVID cases and the COVID-19 exposures, and kind of working it out to offering them the FFCRA pay, if possibly, and if they have it, their sick pay, or any other type of pay that, as a company that you've determined that you will be giving. So hopefully this helps with the understanding. And if you have any questions about this, we'll be talking about it in class. Or if you are one of my colleagues in the workplace, feel free to ask me anytime. And I'm happy to answer any questions that I can. Let's work together to make our environments safe and keep COVID-19 out of the workplace. Thank you so much.